Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something that hits different, a story about being written out of a will after years of sacrifice. This isn't just about money or inheritance, it's about years of being taken for granted, treated like a personal ATM, and then discarded the moment you weren't needed anymore. Before we get started, a quick shout out to all of you who keep showing up for the channel, liking, commenting, sharing, all of it. Thank you so much. Your support honestly keeps this going. Let's start with someone who spent 7 years funding their parents' entire life, only to discover they'd been written out of the will the whole time. But here's the thing, they kept every single bank transfer, every receipt, and every promise that was made. And when the lawyer read that will out loud, well, that's when the real story began. I spent 7 years being the family ATM, and I didn't even realize it until it was almost too late. It started small, like these things always do. My parents were getting older, dad's health was declining, and mom kept mentioning how tight money was getting. I had just landed a solid job in tech, making decent money for the first time in my life, and when mum called asking if I could help with the mortgage one month, I didn't think twice. Of course I'd help. That's what family does, right? 1 month turned into two, then six, then it just became the norm. I was covering the mortgage every single month, plus their medical bills when dad's treatment started piling up, then the property taxes, then the utilities when those got behind. I'm talking about everything: groceries, car repairs, insurance premiums, you name it. Meanwhile, my brother was off traveling Southeast Asia, finding himself or whatever, posting Instagram stories from beaches I couldn't afford to visit because I was too busy funding our parents' entire existence. My sister was living in a trendy downtown apartment, going to concerts, buying designer clothes, living her absolute best life while I was cutting coupons and skipping vacations. But here's the thing, I didn't really mind, or at least I told myself I didn't mind. Mum would always say I was the responsible one, the one she could count on, the one who really understood what family meant. And she'd hint, always hint, that I'd inherit the house since I was practically paying for it anyway. She'd say things like, "Don't worry, we know what you're doing for us, and you'll be taken care of when the time comes, and this house will be yours someday since you're the one keeping it afloat." I never asked for anything in writing because honestly, that felt gross. These were my parents. I trusted them. 7 years. I kept spreadsheets because I'm that kind of person, but not because I was planning to use them. Just for my own records, tracking my budget, making sure I could cover everything. I calculated it once out of curiosity. Over 7 years, I'd paid roughly $240,000 into my parents' life. Their mortgage, their medical expenses, their day-to-day survival. I rebuilt their savings account after dad's first hospital stay wiped it out. I'd kept them housed, fed, and comfortable while my siblings sent birthday cards and showed up for holidays. Then dad passed. It was sudden, a heart attack. And in the chaos of grief and funeral planning, I didn't think about money or wills or any of that. We were a family in mourning. We came together, or at least I thought we did. The funeral was beautiful. My siblings gave tearful speeches. Mum held my hand and thanked me for being strong. 2 weeks later, the lawyer called us all in for the will reading. I'm not going to lie, I was curious. Not greedy, just curious about how Mum and Dad had decided to handle things. I figured the house would come to me, maybe some of the savings, and my siblings would get whatever else there was. Fair compensation for 7 years of financial support. That felt reasonable. The lawyer read the will. Everything was split equally 3 ways. The house, the savings, the investments, everything. 1/3 to my brother, 1/3 to my sister, 1/3 to me. My brother got the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 7 years. My sister got a significant chunk of the savings account I'd literally rebuilt from zero. I got my 1/3 and a separate sealed letter. I sat there in complete shock while my siblings started talking about next steps, about selling the house, or maybe my brother buying out the shares, about how to divide things up fairly. I opened my letter right there in the lawyer's office. It was from Dad, written in his shaky handwriting from near the end. It thanked me for being so generous and selfless. It said they always knew they could count on me. And then, the kicker. It said they knew I didn't expect anything in return because that's just the kind of person I was. I didn't expect anything in return. Like I'd been running a charity for 7 years. Like $250,000 of my own money was just a gift I'd given freely, with no understanding, no agreement, No promise of recognition. I couldn't speak. I literally could not form words. My siblings were chattering away about logistics, and I just sat there holding this letter, reading it over and over, trying to make it make sense. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. I think he knew. I think he'd seen situations like this before. I went home. I didn't go to the family dinner that night. I sat in my apartment, the one I'd been renting for 7 years because I couldn't save for a down payment since all my money was going to my parents. And I pulled out my spreadsheets, every mortgage payment time-stamped and logged, every medical bill I'd covered with receipts, every bank transfer to their account, documented, 7 years of financial records that told a very clear story. Then came the breaking point. I called Mum 3 days later, asked if we could talk about the will. She sighed like I was being difficult and said she'd expected this, expected me to be upset, but she explained in this condescending tone that made my blood boil that I made good money anyway, that my siblings needed it more. My brother was still figuring out his career. My sister had student loans. I was stable. I was fine. I could handle not getting extra. Extra. She called it extra, like the house I'd paid for was some bonus prize I was greedy for wanting. I asked her about the 7 years of payments. She said that was me being generous. That was me helping family. She'd never asked me to expect repayment. I'd offered, I'd volunteered, and yes, she'd appreciated it, but that didn't mean I was owed anything beyond gratitude. That's when I realized they'd used me, systematically, deliberately, for 7 years. They'd kept me paying with vague promises and emotional manipulation while protecting my siblings' inheritance. My brother got a free house because I'd covered the mortgage. My sister got savings because I'd rebuilt what hospital bills destroyed. And I got a thank you letter and a lecture about not being greedy. You almost have to admire the audacity. I hired a lawyer that week, not the family lawyer, a different one. Someone who specialized in financial exploitation and estate disputes. I brought my spreadsheets, my bank records, my emails, and text messages where Mom had asked for help and promised I'd be taken care of. I showed him everything. He looked at me and said, "You have an airtight case for repayment. This is financial elder abuse in reverse. You were exploited." I showed up to the next family dinner with my lawyer. Not to eat, not to chat. I walked in, set down a folder in the middle of the table, and told them all to open it. 7 years of receipts, every mortgage payment, every medical bill, every bank transfer. Itemized, dated, totaled. $243,000, not counting interest. My brother went pale. My sister started crying immediately. Mom stood up and told me I was being cruel, that I was hurting the family, that Dad would be ashamed. My lawyer, bless him, calmly explained that I was filing suit for repayment with interest, that the house my brother inherited had been paid for with my money, and legally I had grounds to claim a significant portion of its value, that the savings account would need to be audited to determine how much I'd contributed. My siblings lost it. My brother started yelling about how he couldn't afford to buy me out, how I was going to force him to sell the house. My sister sobbed that she'd already made plans with her share of the savings. Mum called me selfish, ungrateful, vindictive, said I was tearing the family apart over money. I didn't yell back, I just looked at her and said, "You tore this family apart when you let me pay for everything and then wrote me out like I was a bank you'd finished using." We left. My lawyer sent formal demand letters the next week. My siblings have been scrambling to refinance, trying to figure out how to pay me back without losing everything. Mom won't speak to me. The family group chat, which used to be full of memes and dinner plans, has gone completely silent. I've been blocked by half my extended family who only heard Mum's version of events. But here's the thing. My bank account is about to get very loud. My lawyer is confident we'll settle before trial because they know they'll lose. I'll get my money back, with interest, and maybe, just maybe, they'll learn that family isn't a free ATM. You can't build your financial security on someone else's sacrifice and then act shocked when they want recognition for it. The worst part? I don't even feel good about it. I feel sad. I feel used. But I also feel like I finally stood up for myself after 7 years of being taken for granted. And honestly, that's worth more than any inheritance ever could be. I had 6 friends I'd known since college. We weren't best friends exactly, but we'd been in the same orbit for years. Group dinners, occasional game nights, that sort of thing. When someone floated the idea of a beach trip, everyone got excited. A whole week at a beachfront rental, splitting costs, finally doing the kind of trip we'd always talked about, but never actually planned. I was in immediately. Here's where I made my first mistake. I offered to book everything on my credit card. I had one of those travel rewards cards, and I figured why not rack up the points while helping everyone out. The total came to $4,200, rental, cleaning fees, the whole package. Everyone agreed to Venmo me their share before we left. I sent the confirmation email to the group chat, and everyone reacted with little beach emojis and fire emojis. It felt good, like we were really doing this. The weeks leading up to the trip were normal. We had a group chat going where people discussed what to bring, who was driving with who, what groceries we'd need. I chimed in here and there, mostly just reading along. I was busy with work, so I didn't think much of it when my messages sometimes went unread for a while. People are busy. I got it. Then, the day before we were supposed to leave, the group chat went completely silent. I'd sent a message that morning asking what time we were all meeting up, since we'd planned to carpool from the city. Nothing. I sent another message a few hours later. Still nothing. By evening, I was starting to feel uneasy, but I told myself everyone was probably just packing or getting ready. Maybe they'd all reply in the morning. The next day, I showed up at the meeting point we'd agreed on, a parking lot near one of the guys' apartments. I got there right on time, bags packed, cooler in the trunk, ready for a week of sun and relaxation. I waited and waited. I checked my phone, no new messages. I texted the group chat again, nothing. I tried calling two of them directly, straight to voicemail. I sat there in my car for over an hour, watching the time tick by, feeling more confused and anxious by the minute. Finally, I drove home. I figured maybe I'd gotten the location wrong, or the time wrong, even though I'd triple-checked the messages. I kept refreshing the group chat, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Radio silence. I tried to tell myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe they'd left early and forgot to tell me. Maybe there was some miscommunication I wasn't seeing, but deep down, something felt very, very wrong. Then, a few hours later, I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw it. One of them had posted a story. A beach, sunset, drinks. They were already there. I felt my stomach drop. I checked the location tag. It was a beach town, but not the one we'd booked. I clicked through to another person's story. Same beach. Different rental house. They were all there. Every single one of them. Without me. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to process what I was seeing. They hadn't forgotten me. They hadn't miscommunicated. They'd left without me. Deliberately. And they were posting about it like nothing was wrong, like I didn't exist. My hands were shaking. I didn't know if I was more angry or humiliated, or just completely blindsided. I called the resort where I'd made the original booking. My voice was barely steady when I asked if there was any issue with the reservation. The woman on the phone checked and then said, "Oh, that reservation was cancelled 3 days ago. The refund was processed back to the original card." I froze. I didn't cancel it. Well, someone did. It shows here that the cancellation was requested and the refund issued. I asked her to send me the cancellation details. When I got the email, I saw the name of one of the people in the group listed as the contact who'd called to cancel. They'd cancelled my booking, pocketed the refund, and then booked a different place without me. This wasn't a miscommunication. This wasn't an accident. This was planned, coordinated. They had all agreed to cut me out, take my money, and go on the trip anyway. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I pulled up my credit card statement and saw the $4,200 charge still sitting there. I hadn't been refunded, because the reservation had been under my name and card, but someone had called pretending to have authority and gotten the resort to issue the refund. Except it didn't go back to me. I started piecing it together. They'd used my confirmation number, my details, and somehow convinced the resort to reroute the refund or cancel in a way that let them keep the money. Either way, I was out over $4,000, and they were on a beach vacation I'd paid for. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. I got cold, methodical. I took screenshots of everything: the group chat, the Instagram stories, the booking confirmation, the cancellation email, the credit card statement showing I'd never been refunded. I called my credit card company and filed a dispute for fraud. I explained the situation in detail, how the reservation had been cancelled without my authorization, how the refund hadn't come back to me, how this appeared to be a coordinated scam. The representative took it seriously. They flagged it as fraud and opened an investigation. Then I did something I knew would burn every bridge, but I didn't care anymore. I posted the whole story with screenshots in our college alumni group online. It was a big group, maybe 1,500 people, a lot of whom knew these people professionally or socially. I didn't editorialize. I just laid out the facts, posted the receipts, let people draw their own conclusions. The response was immediate. People were horrified. Some reached out to me privately to ask if I was okay, if I needed anything. Others tagged mutual friends, asking if they'd known about this. A few people who'd had weird experiences with some of the same group members started sharing their own stories. It became a whole thing. The post got shared outside the alumni group. It started making the rounds. Within 48 hours, two of the people involved lost their jobs. Turns out one of them worked somewhere with a strict ethics policy, and when their employer saw evidence they'd participated in what was essentially wire fraud, they were let go. The other worked in finance, and their company didn't want the liability. The ringleader, the one who'd actually called the resort to cancel, had their parents contacted by my credit card company's fraud investigation team. I don't know all the details, but I heard through the grapevine that their parents ended up covering the full amount plus fees to avoid their kid getting charged with fraud. My credit card company reversed the charge completely. I got every cent back plus interest for the dispute period. But the best part, if you can call it that, was watching their reputations disintegrate in real time. People started avoiding them. Mutual friends distanced themselves. Their names became synonymous with those people who scammed their friend. Someone even made a Reddit post about it that got traction. They tried to delete their social media, but screenshots live forever. I never spoke to any of them again. One of them tried to send me a long apology text months later, claiming they'd gone along with it and felt terrible. I deleted it without reading past the first line. Another tried to say it was all a misunderstanding, that they didn't know I wasn't coming. Laughable. The evidence said otherwise. You almost have to admire the audacity, planning something that elaborate, that cruel, and then posting about it on Instagram like you're untouchable. They built their own downfall and didn't even see it coming. I took the refund money and booked a solo trip to a place I'd always wanted to visit. Spent a week hiking, reading, eating good food, and not thinking about any of them. It was the best vacation I'd ever had, and I didn't owe anyone a single apology for what happened to them afterward. They earned every bit of it. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from friends. It comes from the stranger you helped when no one else would. I met Jamie at one of those awkward networking events where everyone's holding cheap wine and pretending their job is more interesting than it actually is. I wasn't even planning to talk to anyone, honestly. I was there because my company encouraged us to network, and I figured I'd show my face, grab some appetizers, and leave. But Jamie approached me during one of those painful lulls in conversation, and we just clicked immediately. They were sharp, genuinely sharp, asking insightful questions about my work, cracking jokes about the overly corporate vibe of the event. We ended up talking for over an hour. During that conversation, Jamie mentioned they'd been struggling to find work in our field, despite having the skills and experience. They'd been underemployed for almost a year, doing freelance gigs that barely paid rent, sending out applications that disappeared into the void. I felt for them. I've been there. Job hunting is brutal, and sometimes all you need is one person to vouch for you, one connection to open a door. I told Jamie to send me their resume, that I'd take a look and see if I could help. When they sent it over, I could see the potential immediately. The experience was there, the skills were solid, but the resume itself needed work. It wasn't formatted well, and some of the descriptions undersold what they'd actually accomplished. So I spent an evening editing it, tightening up the language, making it shine. Then I sent it back with some advice on how to tailor it for specific roles. Jamie was incredibly grateful. We started grabbing coffee regularly, talking about career stuff, industry trends, just building what felt like a genuine friendship. A few months later, a position opened up on my team. It wasn't a senior role, but it was solid, stable, and honestly a great fit for Jamie's background. I immediately thought of them. I talked to my boss, sent over Jamie's resume with a glowing recommendation, and really went to bat during the hiring discussions. I told my boss that Jamie was hungry, talented, and exactly the kind of person we needed on the team. My boss trusted my judgment. They always had. So Jamie got the interview, nailed it, and got hired. I was genuinely excited. I'd helped someone I cared about land a job, and now I'd get to work alongside them. Jamie started a few weeks later, and I made it my mission to set them up for success. I trained them on our systems, introduced them to key contacts, looped them into projects, shared institutional knowledge that takes years to build. Jamie was enthusiastic, hardworking, always staying late, always asking questions. They seemed so grateful, constantly thanking me for the opportunity, telling me they wouldn't be there without me. We became close, not just work friends, but actual friends. We'd grab lunch, vent about difficult clients, make plans outside the office. I trusted Jamie completely. Why wouldn't I? I'd brought them into my professional world, and they were thriving. 6 months in, my boss called me into his office. The energy was off immediately. He looked uncomfortable, wouldn't make eye contact, and I knew something bad was coming. He told me there were budget cuts. The company was restructuring. They were letting me go. My position was being eliminated. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I'd been with the company for 5 years. I had excellent performance reviews. This came out of nowhere. Then he said Jamie would be absorbing some of my responsibilities. At a lower salary, of course, since they were less experienced. It was framed as a cost-saving measure, nothing personal. Just business. I was devastated but tried to stay professional. I asked questions about severance, timelines, what my exit would look like. I didn't cry, didn't yell, just nodded and processed the information, like I was receiving news about the weather. But that wasn't even the worst part. A few days later, I was clearing out my desk when a coworker pulled me aside. She looked uncomfortable, like she'd been debating whether to say something. Finally, she just came out with it. Jamie had been meeting privately with our boss for weeks, not about projects or normal work stuff, about me, about my performance, suggesting that I was coasting, that I wasn't pulling my weight anymore, that the work I was doing could easily be handled by someone at a lower level. Jamie had essentially auditioned for my job while I was training them, positioning themselves as the cheaper, hungrier alternative. I felt sick, physically sick. This person I'd mentored, whose resume I'd edited, who I'd vouched for and brought into the company, had been systematically undermining me to take my position. They'd used every piece of knowledge I'd shared, every contact I'd introduced them to, every project I'd brought them onto, and turned it into ammunition against me. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every interaction, every lunch conversation, every moment I thought we were building a friendship. Had it all been strategy? Had Jamie been planning this from the beginning? Or had the opportunity just presented itself and they'd seized it? Either way, it didn't matter. The betrayal was complete. Here's where it gets absurd. I started going through my emails. Not to wallow, but because something felt off about the whole situation, and I wanted to understand exactly what had happened. As I dug through old project threads, I noticed a pattern. There were several emails where Jamie had taken credit for work I'd done. Not directly lying, but carefully wording things to make it seem like they'd led initiatives I'd actually spearheaded. In one email to our boss, Jamie presented a strategy I'd developed as their own idea, suggesting we implement it as a new direction. Our boss had praised them for their innovative thinking. I took screenshots of everything. The original project files with my name and timestamps. The emails where I'd explained strategies to Jamie. Then the later emails where Jamie presented those exact strategies as their own insights. I had receipts for months of this behavior. A clear pattern of taking credit while I'd been too trusting to notice. I didn't confront Jamie. I went straight to HR with everything. I also CC'd the executive team because at this point, I had nothing to lose. I laid out the timeline, provided documentation, and explained that I believed I'd been let go based on false information provided by someone who'd been systematically taking credit for my work. HR launched an internal investigation. During that investigation, someone thought to actually verify Jamie's credentials. You know, the thing they should have done during the hiring process, but probably skipped because I'd vouched so strongly. Turns out Jamie had lied on their resume. The degree they claimed to have, never completed. The previous job title they'd listed, inflated. They'd worked there, but in a much more junior capacity. Professional certifications they claimed didn't exist. I'd never verified any of it because I trusted them. I'd taken everything at face value because we were friends, or at least I thought we were. The company had trusted my judgment enough not to dig too deep. and Jamie had exploited that trust completely. The investigation took less than a week. Jamie was fired immediately, escorted out of the building the same way I'd been told I'd have to leave. I was reinstated with back pay and an official apology from the executive team. They offered me Jamie's now vacant position, which felt like the universe's strangest form of justice, but I declined. I didn't want to stay at a company that had been so quick to believe I was coasting, based on the word of someone who'd been there 6 months. But here's the thing about our industry. It's small. Word travels fast. Within days, people knew what had happened. Not because I spread it, I didn't have to. The investigation had involved enough people that the story got out. Jamie became toxic, unhireable. They'd lied on their resume, backstabbed the person who'd helped them, and gotten caught. No one wanted to take that risk. I heard through the grapevine that Jamie tried to reach out to mutual contacts from that networking event where we'd met, looking for job leads. Those same people now knew the full story. The doors that had started to open slammed shut. Jamie's now blacklisted in our industry, or at least in our city's professional circles. They burned a bridge they didn't even realize was holding up their entire career. I ended up taking a position at a competitor 3 weeks later. Better title, better pay, better culture. During my interview, they asked why I was leaving my previous company. I was honest but professional, said there had been some internal politics and a situation that got resolved in my favor, but I was ready for a fresh start. They appreciated the honesty and later told me they'd heard whispers about what happened and respected how I'd handled it. The whole experience taught me something I wish I'd learned less painfully. Trust is a currency you can only spend once. I'd spent all my professional trust on Jamie, vouched for them without verification, opened doors without hesitation, and they'd cashed it all in to try to destroy me. I don't help strangers get jobs anymore. Not like that. Not without serious vetting, without checking references myself, without protecting my own position first. It sounds cynical, and maybe it is, but it's also survival. The professional world can be brutal, and sometimes the person smiling across from you at lunch is the same person undermining you in closed-door meetings. I'm not saying don't help people. I'm saying help them with your eyes open. Trust, but verify. And if someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Jamie probably thought they were being smart, strategic, doing what it took to get ahead. Instead, they destroyed their own reputation and lost the one person who'd actually believed in them. That's not strategy. That's just short-sighted self-destruction dressed up as ambition. Speaking of names being used without permission, imagine discovering yours was used to ruin your credit before you even knew what credit was. I was 23 years old when I found out my parents had stolen my identity. Not in some dramatic movie reveal, not through some careful investigation I conducted. No, I found out because a collections agency called me about debts I didn't even know existed. It started simple enough. I was applying for my first real apartment, finally moving out of the cramped place I'd been sharing with 2 roommates since college. I had a decent job, some savings. I was responsible with money. I'd never even had a credit card because I was terrified of debt. I'd watched too many friends drown in student loans and credit card interest, so I'd been careful. Paid for everything in cash or debit. Lived within my means. I thought I was doing everything right. The landlord ran my credit check as part of the application process. Standard procedure. I wasn't worried. And then his face changed when he looked at the results. He got this uncomfortable expression, like he didn't want to be the one to tell me whatever he was about to tell me. He slid the paper across his desk and said he was sorry, but he couldn't approve my application with a credit score that low. I looked at the number, 540. I stared at it, completely confused. That had to be a mistake. I'd never borrowed money in my life. I asked him if he'd pulled the wrong person's report, maybe someone with a similar name. He double-checked. No, it was definitely me. My social security number, my date of birth, everything matched. I went home in a daze and pulled my own credit report that night. And that's when my entire world tilted sideways. $40,000 in debt, medical bills from hospitals I'd never been to, 2 car loans for vehicles I'd never owned, a furniture store credit account I'd never opened, all of it in collections, all of it destroying my credit score, and all of it opened when I was between 16 and 19 years old, when I was in high school and early college, living in dorms, not even thinking about credit or loans or any of this. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, trying to make sense of it. Identity theft was my first thought. Someone had stolen my information and opened accounts. But the addresses listed were my parents' house. The phone numbers were my parents' numbers. And then I noticed the dates. The first account was opened 2 months after my 16th birthday. Right when you can legally add someone to credit applications. My stomach dropped. I called one of the collections agencies the next morning, hands shaking, and asked for details on the debt. The woman on the phone was surprisingly helpful once I explained I thought I was a victim of identity theft. She pulled up the account. Medical bills from when my dad had that surgery during my junior year of high school. The car loan was for my mum's SUV that she'd bought when I was 17. The furniture lease was for the living room set they'd bought right before I left for college. They'd used my name, my credit, my social security number, and I'd had no idea. I confronted them that night, showed up at their house with printouts of everything, my credit report highlighted and annotated. I wasn't yelling when I walked in. I was calm, eerily calm. I just put the papers on the kitchen table and asked them to explain. My dad started crying immediately, just full-on tears, which I'd never seen from him before. My mum got defensive within seconds, which was more her style. She started with excuses before I'd even finished asking the question. They were going to pay it back. They'd had some financial trouble. They didn't think it would be a big deal. They were going to fix it before I ever needed to use my credit. I asked when. When were they planning to fix it? The oldest debt was 7 years old now. When exactly were they planning to tell me they'd destroyed my financial future before I even had a chance to build one? That's when Mum said it. The line that made everything crystal clear. You weren't using your credit anyway. And family helps family. Family helps family. Like I'd volunteered for this. Like I'd known and agreed to let them commit fraud using my identity while I was a literal teenager. I asked about the $40,000. How were they planning to pay back $40,000 when they clearly hadn't paid back a cent in 7 years? Dad just kept crying. Mum got more defensive, said I was being dramatic, that this was what families did for each other, that they'd raised me and fed me and clothed me, and this was the least I could do. The least I could do was let them commit felony identity theft and ruin my credit before I was old enough to vote. I left that night and didn't sleep. I just sat in my apartment researching identity theft, credit repair, legal options, and the more I read, the angrier I got. They'd stolen from me. Systematically, for years, they'd used my identity to fund their lifestyle while I was in college eating ramen and working part-time jobs to cover my expenses. They'd bought cars and furniture and paid for medical procedures on credit they took out in my name, and then they'd let it all go to collections, destroying my score, making it impossible for me to rent an apartment or get a car loan or do any of the normal financial things a young adult needs to do. But that wasn't even the worst part. I called the collections agencies back and asked more questions. Turned out my parents had been getting calls and letters about these debts for years. They'd been ignoring them. They'd never made a single payment, not one. They had no intention of paying any of it back. They were just going to let it sit there on my credit report, ruining my financial future, and they were apparently hoping I'd never find out or never need credit. I filed police reports for identity theft the next week. All of them. One for each fraudulent account. The police detective I spoke with was sympathetic but direct. He told me that to clear the debt from my record, I'd need to press charges. Otherwise, legally, I'd be responsible for the debt since it was in my name. Even though I was a minor when most of it was opened, even though I'd never signed anything, the only way to prove fraud and clear my name was to prosecute the people who'd committed the fraud. My parents. They found out when the police showed up to question them. My mom called me screaming. How could I do this to them? How could I report them to the police? I was going to ruin the family. I was going to send my own parents to jail over money. What kind of person does that? I told her the kind of person who wanted a future. The kind of person who didn't appreciate being used as a financial scapegoat while they were still in high school. The kind of person who wasn't going to let someone else's fraudulent decisions destroy the next decade of their life. My dad called next, still crying, begging me to drop it. Said they'd figure out a payment plan. They'd fix it somehow. Just please don't press charges. I asked him how. How were they going to pay back $40,000 plus 7 years of interest and collections fees when they hadn't paid a single dollar in 7 years. He didn't have an answer. I pressed charges, full stop, no hesitation. They were arrested, booked, charged with identity theft and fraud. My extended family lost their minds. Aunts and uncles I barely knew came out of the woodwork to tell me I was a horrible daughter. Cousins posted vague Facebook statuses about family loyalty. My grandmother told me I was dead to her. They all said the same thing, variations on the theme of how could I send my own parents to jail? How could I destroy the family like this? How could I be so cruel over money? Not one of them asked what my parents had done to me. Not one of them acknowledged that identity theft is a crime, that ruining someone's credit is financial abuse, that what they did to me was illegal and wrong. They just saw a daughter prosecuting her parents and decided I was the villain. Things went from bad to unhinged. The court case took months. My parents hired a lawyer who tried to paint them as desperate people who'd made a mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming. 7 years of fraud, multiple accounts, tens of thousands of dollars. No attempt at repayment. They pleaded guilty eventually, probably because they had no other choice. They got probation, community service, and restitution. They have to pay me back every cent with interest on a court-ordered payment plan. They're still paying it now, 3 years later. The debt was cleared from my record once the guilty plea was entered. I disputed everything with the credit bureaus, provided the police reports and court documents, and watched my credit score climb from 540 to 780 over the next 18 months. I bought my first house at 26, got approved for a mortgage with a great interest rate. Stood in my empty living room on move-in day and cried because I'd actually done it. I'd rebuilt my entire financial life from the ground zero my parents had created. I haven't spoken to them in 3 years, not since the sentencing. They tried to reach out a few times, letters mostly, saying they were sorry and they wanted to reconcile. But their apologies always came with justifications. They were struggling. They didn't know what else to do. They thought I'd understand someday. I understand perfectly. I understand that they valued their comfort over my future. I understand that they committed crimes and expected me to just absorb the consequences. I understand that when I refused to be their victim, they and the entire family painted me as the bad guy. My extended family still doesn't talk to me. I'm not invited to holidays or weddings or reunions. I'm the girl who sent her parents to jail. That's my legacy in that family, and honestly, I'm fine with it. Some families deserve to be ruined. Some families are built on exploitation and manipulation, and the expectation that you'll just take the abuse because you're related. I built a new life, found friends who became my real family, started therapy to unpack all the ways I'd been conditioned to accept mistreatment as love. And, yeah, my parents are still making restitution payments. Every month money shows up in my account, court-ordered repayment for the financial abuse they put me through. It's not about the money anymore. It's about the fact that I stood up for myself when everyone told me not to. It's about the fact that I chose my own future over their comfort. And it's about the fact that I'm living proof that you can rebuild from ruins, even when the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones who burned everything down. But wait until you hear what happened when one family secret was revealed at the absolute worst moment possible. My uncle died on a Tuesday. Heart attack, completely sudden, no warning. He was only 63. The family was devastated. He'd been this larger-than-life figure, successful businessman, always traveling, always had interesting stories about places he'd been and people he'd met. Everyone loved him. The funeral was massive, over 200 people packed into this church my grandmother had attended for 50 years. My aunt sat in the front row, dressed in black, playing the grieving widow perfectly. My cousins flanked her, crying softly. The whole family was there, extended relatives I hadn't seen in years, all gathered to mourn this man who'd seemingly done everything right. Successful career, long marriage, pillar of the community. The service was beautiful in that sad, formal way funerals are. People shared memories, talked about his generosity, his sense of humor, his impact on their lives. Then Dave stood up to speak. I'd seen Dave around over the years, always at a distance. He was introduced as my uncle's best friend from college, his travel buddy, the guy he'd go on fishing trips with. They'd known each other for 40 years, apparently. Dave was older, maybe late 60s, and he looked absolutely wrecked. more devastated than anyone else in that room, honestly. His hands were shaking when he gripped the podium. He started talking about their friendship, how they'd met in college, how they'd stayed close through everything, how my uncle had been the most important person in his life. People were nodding, smiling sadly at this tribute to lifelong friendship. Dave talked about trips they'd taken, inside jokes they'd shared, the life they'd built together. Then he said it. He was the love of my life. The room didn't just go quiet. It froze. You could feel the air change. People stopped breathing. Dave kept talking, and I realized he wasn't being metaphorical. He meant it literally. They'd been partners for decades, not friends, partners, romantic partners. They'd lived together, built a life together, loved each other for 40 years. But they'd kept it secret because of our family, because my grandmother was ultra-religious, because my aunt's side of the family was conservative, because being openly gay would have meant being cut off from everyone. So my uncle had lived a double life. Fake marriage to my aunt for appearances, real life with Dave, hidden away. Dave was never invited to family holidays, never acknowledged at family gatherings, never introduced as anything more than the friend. He'd been erased from my uncle's public life for 4 decades while being the center of his private one. My aunt stood up screaming, just full volume, incoherent rage, shouting at Dave to sit down, to shut up, calling him a liar. My cousin started crying harder, but now it was confusion and shock mixed with grief. My grandmother actually fainted, just collapsed right there in the pew. People rushed to help her while others stared at Dave in horror or disbelief, or, in a few cases, understanding. Dave finished his speech. He didn't yell back at my aunt. He just said that my uncle had asked him years ago to tell the truth if anything ever happened to him, that he was tired of hiding, tired of lying, and he wanted people to know who he really was. Then Dave sat down, and the funeral completely imploded. The pastor tried to regain control, move things along, but it was chaos. People were whispering, arguing. Some were walking out. My aunt was being comforted by relatives who were shooting murderous looks at Dave. The service ended early, awkwardly, with half the attendees already gone, and here's where it gets absurd. A week later, the will reading happened. My aunt showed up expecting to inherit everything. The house, the savings, the investment accounts, all of it. She'd been married to my uncle for 35 years. In her mind, it was all hers. The lawyer read the will. My uncle left everything to Dave. The house they'd actually shared, the one my aunt never lived in, the savings they'd built together, everything. My aunt was left nothing, not because my uncle was cruel, but because legally she wasn't actually his wife. Turns out they were never legally married. The wedding had been for show, a ceremony at the family church, but no actual license filed. It was all for appearances, an arrangement they'd both agreed to decades ago, so my uncle could keep his family and his inheritance while living his real life with Dave. My aunt had known the whole time. She'd agreed to it. She got to live a comfortable life, funded by my uncle's success, attended family events as the respectable wife, and in return she kept the secret. Now she was trying to contest the will, claiming she deserved everything as the widow. But the lawyers had documentation, letters between her and my uncle discussing the arrangement, proof that she'd known about Dave from the beginning, evidence that she'd been compensated over the years for maintaining the facade. She had no legal claim to anything. The family absolutely detonated. My grandmother refused to speak Dave's name, blamed him for corrupting her son, said he was going to hell. Half the family cut off my aunt, furious that she'd participated in the deception, that she'd lied to all of them for decades. The other half cut off Dave, called him a homewrecker, said he'd destroyed the family with his speech, that he should have stayed silent and let my uncle rest in peace. Family group chats split into factions. People took sides. Thanksgiving that year didn't happen because no one could agree on who was invited. Christmas was 3 separate gatherings, each pretending the others didn't exist. Cousins stopped talking to each other. Siblings who'd been close for 50 years stopped speaking. I was one of 3 relatives who stayed in contact with Dave. I reached out a few weeks after the funeral, told him I was sorry for what he'd been through, for having to hide for so long. We met for coffee. He told me stories about my uncle I'd never heard, showed me photos from trips they'd taken, shared memories of a person I'd thought I knew but really didn't. The version of my uncle I'd grown up with was a performance. The real him had been kept carefully hidden. Dave sold the house about 6 months later and moved across the country. Said he couldn't stay in a place where half the people who saw him looked at him like he'd committed a crime by loving someone. He was grieving, and instead of support, he got hatred from people who'd never bothered to know him. We still get coffee when he visits. He's doing better now, has a little apartment near the ocean, stays in touch with a few of my uncle's old friends who'd actually known the truth. He doesn't regret the speech, said my uncle had lived enough of his life in hiding, and he deserved to be remembered for who he actually was, not the version the family needed him to be. My aunt moved in with one of my cousins. She's bitter, isolated, angry at Dave for taking what she thinks was hers, even though she was never more than a prop in my uncle's real life. She still tells people she was his wife, still plays the widow at family events with the relatives who'll tolerate her. The family never recovered. We're fractured permanently. Some people blame Dave for speaking up. Some blame my aunt for the arrangement. Some blame my uncle for lying. I blame the culture that made hiding necessary in the first place, the religious rigidity that forced a good man to live a double life for 40 years because being honest would have cost him his family. Some truths detonate everything. This one leveled 3 generations of relationships in under 10 minutes. Was it worth it? I think Dave would say yes. My uncle wanted to be known, really known, and now he is. The cost was steep, but the alternative was letting him be buried under a lie, letting Dave grieve alone and invisible, letting the facade stand forever. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. I want to know which story hit hardest. Trust me, we're just getting started. Now back to our story. The fallout was nuclear, but it made me realize something. Sometimes the people hiding the truth are the ones standing right beside you. I spent 3 years as my mum's primary caregiver after her stroke, and in that time, I learned what exhaustion really means. Not the kind where you're tired after a long day at work. The kind where you haven't slept more than 3 hours straight in months because you're listening for fools, monitoring breathing, waking up for medication schedules. The kind where you forget what it feels like to leave the house without coordinating with home health aides or rearranging medical equipment. Mom's stroke happened suddenly. One day she was independent, vibrant, living her life. The next day, half her body didn't work, her speech was slurred, and she needed help with everything. Everything. Feeding, bathing, getting dressed, going to the bathroom, taking medications, getting to appointments. The doctors said she might regain some function with intensive therapy, but she'd never be fully independent again. My sibling and I had a conversation that first week in the hospital. We talked about what Mom would need, how we'd handle caregiving, how we'd split responsibilities. My sibling had a demanding job, they said, lots of travel, but they'd help when they could. They'd contribute financially, visit regularly, be there for the big stuff. I had more flexible work, I lived closer, so it made sense for me to be the primary caregiver. At the time, it seemed reasonable, fair even. That arrangement lasted about 2 months before it became clear I was doing this alone. My sibling visited twice in 3 years. Twice. Once during the first month when they stayed for a weekend and mostly sat in the living room while I continued doing everything I'd been doing. Once about a year later, for a few hours on Christmas, where they brought gifts and took photos with Mom and then left before dinner. Every other time I asked for help, for someone to cover a shift so I could rest, for financial assistance with the mounting costs. I got excuses. Too busy. Work was crazy. They'd help next month. They'd send money soon. It never came. I kept logs of everything because I'm that kind of person, and also because I needed to track Mum's care for medical purposes. Medication schedules, therapy appointments, symptom changes, dietary needs. I had spreadsheets. I had photos time-stamped from my phone showing the daily routine, the equipment, the reality of what caregiving actually looked like. I had bank statements showing I'd been covering costs that insurance didn't, modifications to the house, supplies, co-pays for medications and appointments. 3 years of this. 3 years of watching my own life shrink to the size of Mum's bedroom and the path to the kitchen. 3 years of cancelled plans, missed opportunities, relationships that faded because I didn't have the energy to maintain them. 3 years of loving my mum fiercely while also feeling trapped by the weight of being the only one who showed up. When Mom passed, it was both devastating and In some terrible way, a relief. Devastating because I loved her. Relief because I could finally breathe without listening for her call bell, could sleep without setting alarms, could exist without the constant weight of responsibility pressing down on every moment. The memorial service was planned quickly. My sibling took charge of organizing it, which was fine. I was too exhausted to care about logistics. They arranged the venue, contacted relatives, put together photo boards. I showed up in the black dress I'd bought specifically for this day I'd been dreading, and I sat in the front row feeling numb. Then my siblings stood up to give their speech. They talked about sacrifice, about sleepless nights, about the difficulty of watching a parent decline, of being there through the hard moments, of putting their own life on hold to care for mom. They cried, real tears streaming down their face, voice breaking with emotion. They talked about how much they'd learned, how caregiving had changed them, how they'd never forget the privilege of being there for mom in her final years. People were hugging them afterward, telling them how strong they were, how devoted, what a wonderful child they'd been. Relatives I hadn't seen in years were praising their dedication, and I just sat there, watching this performance, feeling like I was losing my mind. At the wake, it got worse. Relatives started asking me why I hadn't helped more, why I'd let my sibling carry such a heavy burden alone. One aunt actually said, "It's good that at least one of you stepped up," while looking directly at me. Another cousin mentioned how hard it must have been for my sibling to balance work and caregiving, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd been doing exactly that, alone for 3 years. That's when everything unraveled. I excused myself, went to my car and grabbed my laptop. I'd brought it because I'd been planning to show a photo slideshow of Mum during the wake. Happy memories, a celebration of her life. Instead, I set it up, connected it to the TV in the venue, and pulled up a different folder. 3 years of documentation. Time-stamped photos of me helping Mum with physical therapy exercises, me preparing her meals, me at 2 in the morning helping her to the bathroom. Medical appointment logs with my name as the primary contact on every single one. Bank statements showing thousands of dollars in expenses I'd covered. The room gradually went quiet as people realized what they were looking at. My sibling noticed and tried to approach me, asking what I was doing, but I was already pulling up text message screenshots. Months and months of messages where I'd asked for help and been turned down. Messages where my sibling said they were too busy. Messages where they'd promised to visit and then cancelled. And the one that really summed it all up, the one I read aloud to the entire room. "You're better at this stuff anyway. Just handle it." You could hear a pin drop. My sibling's face went from confused to pale to red. They tried to leave, actually started walking toward the door. I stepped in front of them and asked them to stay, asked them to explain to everyone how exactly they'd sacrificed and lost sleep when they'd visited twice in 3 years. Asked them to clarify which sleepless nights they were referring to, because I had logs of every single night I'd been up with Mom, and their name didn't appear anywhere. People started looking at my sibling differently. The same relatives who'd been praising them minutes ago were now silent, uncomfortable. My aunt, who'd criticized me for not helping more, was staring at the TV screen showing a photo of me at 3 in the morning, helping Mom after a fall, time-stamped and dated. My sibling tried to defend themselves, said they'd helped in other ways, emotional support, that caregiving isn't just physical. I pulled up the call logs from my phone. In 3 years, my sibling had called Mom maybe 20 times. Most of those calls lasted less than 5 minutes. I'd spoken to her every single day, multiple times a day, because I lived with her and was managing her care. The family turned on them instantly. It was like watching a switch flip. Suddenly everyone was asking my sibling why they'd lied, why they'd taken credit, how they could stand up there and give that speech knowing what the truth was. My sibling started crying again, but this time it wasn't moving anyone. They looked around the room for support and found none. They left, just grabbed their coat and walked out of the wake without another word. I haven't heard from them since. No apology, no explanation, nothing. They blocked me on social media and changed their phone number. As far as I know, they've told their friends some version of events where I'm the villain, but I don't really care anymore. Some relatives have told me I humiliated my sibling, that I should have handled it privately, that the wake wasn't the place for that kind of confrontation. One cousin said I ruined Mum's memorial by making it about drama, but here's what I know. My sibling stood up in front of everyone who loved my mom and lied. They took credit for years of work they didn't do, sacrifice they didn't make, nights they didn't lose sleep. They let people believe I'd been absent or unhelpful while they played the martyr. I didn't humiliate them. I corrected the record. And yeah, maybe the timing wasn't perfect, but when exactly was I supposed to do it? After everyone had already formed their opinions? After my sibling had successfully rewritten history? They chose to lie publicly. I chose to tell the truth publicly. Seems fair to me. Mum would have wanted the truth. She knew who was there. She knew who showed up, who stayed, who did the work. In her more lucid moments near the end, she thanked me. Tell me she knew how hard it was. Tell me she appreciated everything. She never once mentioned my sibling doing any caregiving because my sibling wasn't there to do it. I spent 3 years giving everything I had to take care of my mum, and I don't regret a second of it. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let someone else wear that experience like a costume they can put on for sympathy and praise. Caregiving isn't a story you tell, it's a reality you live, and my sibling didn't live it, I did. Family pressure doesn't always come from taking credit. Sometimes it comes from them demanding you sacrifice your future for theirs. My partner of 3 years proposed to me at my birthday party, in front of 80 people, family, friends, co-workers, everyone I cared about packed into this rented event space, music playing, decorations everywhere, and then suddenly the music cut out, and my partner was down on one knee, with a ring box open, asking me to marry them. I was completely shocked. We talked about marriage in abstract terms, the way couples do when they're comfortable, but not necessarily planning anything concrete. I knew we were serious, but I didn't know a proposal was coming. Definitely not like this, not in front of everyone. My mind went blank for a second. Everyone was watching, phones out recording. Huge smiles on their faces, waiting for my answer. I said yes. What else was I going to say in that moment? And honestly, part of me was genuinely happy. Surprised, overwhelmed, but happy. Everyone cheered, people were crying. My mom was crying. Friends rushed over to hug us both, to see the ring, to congratulate us. The rest of the party was a blur of people toasting to us, asking about wedding plans, telling us how perfect we were together. It felt surreal but magical in that overwhelming way big moments sometimes do. The next 2 days were a whirlwind. Calls from relatives, group chats blowing up with congratulations, people sending gift ideas and venue suggestions. My partner seemed happy enough, smiling for photos, thanking people for their well wishes, playing the part of excited fiancé. But there was something off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. They seemed distant when it was just us, distracted, like their mind was somewhere else. 2 days after the proposal, I was at their apartment. They were in the shower and their phone kept buzzing on the coffee table. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the notifications kept lighting up the screen, and I glanced over out of habit. The messages were from their group chat with their close friends. I saw my name. I saw the word proposal, and I saw a message that made my stomach drop. Did the fake proposal work? I picked up the phone. I know, invasion of privacy, whatever. But something felt wrong and I needed to know. I scrolled up through the conversation, and there it was, laid out in text messages spanning the past 2 weeks. Their friends had been mocking them for not committing, calling them commitment phobic, making jokes about how they were never going to settle down. It had clearly gotten under their skin, so my partner had come up with a plan. Stage a public proposal to shut everyone up, make it big and dramatic so no one could question their commitment, and then quietly break off the engagement in a few months. Blame it on cold feet or timing or whatever excuse felt most believable. The proposal wasn't real. It was a performance to save face with their friends. One message said, "Think she bought it?" Another said, "Just play along for a few months, then you can bail." A third said, "At least now everyone will get off your back about marriage." I sat there staring at the phone, reading and rereading the messages, trying to make them mean something other than what they obviously meant. My partner came out of the bathroom, saw me holding their phone, and their face went white. I asked them if it was true, if the proposal was fake. They tried to deflect at first, said I was misreading the texts, that their friends were just joking, but I kept pushing, kept asking direct questions, and eventually they cracked. They admitted it, said they'd felt pressured by their friends, by the constant comments about commitment, and they'd panicked. The proposal was a way to get everyone off their back. They thought I'd just go along with it, that we'd play engaged for a while, and then they'd figure out what they actually wanted. They said it like it was a reasonable plan, like using me as a prop in their social drama was just a minor miscalculation. I asked if they had any intention of actually marrying me. They hesitated, then said they didn't know, that they hadn't thought that far ahead. They just wanted the pressure to stop. That's when everything unraveled. I couldn't even process the layers of betrayal. They'd proposed to me in front of 80 people, let me believe it was real, let my family believe it was real, accepted congratulations and well wishes, all while planning to quietly end it later, like it had never happened. They'd used one of the most significant moments in a relationship as a prop for their own ego, with zero regard for what it would do to me when the truth came out. I told them we were done, not the engagement, the relationship, all of it. They tried to backtrack, said they did love me, that they'd just made a stupid mistake, that we could work through it. I packed up the few things I had at their place and left. But I wasn't done, not even close, because 80 people had witnessed that proposal. 80 people had congratulated us, celebrated with us, believed in something that was a complete lie, and I wasn't going to let them think I was the one who'd ended an engagement for no reason. I wasn't going to be the bad guy in this story. I called everyone who'd been at that party. Not all 80 people, but the key ones. My close friends, my family, a few co-workers who'd been there. I explained what had happened, told them about the texts, about the plan to fake the engagement. Some people were shocked, some were angry on my behalf. A few had apparently had weird feelings about the proposal that they'd brushed off, but now made sense. Then I sent screenshots of the messages to a few mutual friends who I knew would spread the word. Not out of malice, just out of reality. People talk, and I wanted the truth out there before my ex could spin some story where I was unstable or overreacting. Then I posted a single Instagram story, just text on a black background. The engagement is off, the relationship is over, the lie is exposed. I didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Within hours, people were reaching out asking what happened. I sent screenshots to anyone who asked directly. The story spread fast. By the next day, pretty much everyone in our social circle knew the truth. My ex tried damage control, posted some vague story about how things were complicated, and people shouldn't believe everything they hear. But mutual friends had already picked sides, and most of them picked mine. Because what my ex had done wasn't just stupid, it was cruel, it was manipulative. It showed a level of cowardice and disregard that people couldn't overlook. They're now known as the person who fake proposed. It's become their reputation in our social circles. I've heard through the grapevine that they've tried dating since, but people know the story. It precedes them. They're the person who proposed to someone in front of 80 people as a social strategy with no intention of following through. I'm single now, and yeah, I'm humiliated. I spent 2 days thinking I was engaged, telling people, feeling that excitement, only to have it ripped away by the revelation that it was all theater. I cried. A lot. I felt stupid for not seeing the signs, for believing in the moment, for thinking my partner of 3 years wouldn't do something so fundamentally dishonest. But I'm also free. Free from a coward. Free from someone who'd rather manipulate me than have an honest conversation about where our relationship was going. Free from someone who thought so little of my feelings that they'd stage a life-changing moment as a way to save face with their friends. Looking back, there were signs, times when they'd deflected conversations about the future, moments when their commitment felt more performative than genuine. But I'd loved them, trusted them, given them the benefit of the doubt, and they'd exploited that trust in the worst possible way. The worst part isn't even the fake proposal, it's the calculation behind it. They sat down with their friends and planned this. They bought a ring, they chose my birthday party as the venue for maximum impact. They rehearsed what they'd say, all of it deliberate, all of it designed to manipulate me and everyone around us for their own comfort. Oh, so we're doing that now, using proposals as social leverage? Some people asked why I exposed them so publicly, why I didn't just quietly end things and move on. And honestly, because they made the proposal public. They involved 80 people in their lie. Those same 80 people deserve to know the truth. I wasn't going to let them rewrite the narrative, wasn't going to let them paint me as the villain who broke off an engagement for no reason. I'm rebuilding now. Therapy helps, friends help, time helps. I'm learning to trust my instincts again, to not second guess red flags, to value honesty over comfort. And I'm learning that sometimes the person you think you know best is the one hiding the biggest lie. They reached out a few months ago, sent a long apology text, said they'd grown, that they understood what they'd done wrong, that they hoped someday I could forgive them. I didn't respond. Some actions don't deserve forgiveness. Some betrayals are so fundamental that no amount of time or apologizing can undo them. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust someone the same way again. That innocence is gone. But I do know that I'll never again ignore my gut when something feels off. And I'll never again settle for someone who sees our relationship as a tool for managing their own insecurities, rather than as a partnership built on honesty and respect. The fake proposal broke my heart, but it also freed me from a future with someone who would have kept lying, kept manipulating, kept using me as a prop in their life story. And for that, as painful as it was, I'm grateful. Lies hidden in phones seem to be a recurring theme, and this next story proves that sometimes what you find changes everything. My partner of 5 years started acting different about 8 months ago. Nothing dramatic at first, just small shifts, more work trips than usual, longer hours at the office, phone always face down on the table, extra time in the bathroom with the door locked. I wasn't the paranoid type, never had been, but I'm also not stupid. I noticed patterns, I noticed changes, and something was definitely changing. I didn't immediately jump to cheating. That felt too cliche, too obvious. I thought maybe they were stressed about work, dealing with something they didn't want to burden me with, going through some kind of personal crisis. I tried asking if everything was okay. They always said yes, gave me a kiss, told me I was overthinking, so I backed off, gave them space, trusted them the way you're supposed to trust someone you've been with for 5 years, someone you'd been planning a future with. Then one night, I was grabbing their gym bag from the car to bring it inside so they could wash their workout clothes. Normal domestic stuff. As I picked it up, I heard a buzzing sound. I thought it was their regular phone at first, but when I checked, their phone was on the kitchen counter charging. The buzzing was coming from inside the gym bag. I unzipped it and found a phone I'd never seen before. Different case, different model, tucked into a side pocket underneath a towel. It was still buzzing with notifications. My stomach dropped before I even understood why. Something about finding a hidden phone just screams, deception. There's no innocent explanation for a secret device. I opened it. No passcode, which in retrospect was either arrogant or careless. The notifications were from dating apps, multiple dating apps, Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, active conversations with multiple people, flirty messages, explicit photos. I scrolled through, my hands shaking, feeling like I was watching my entire relationship disintegrate in real time. But that wasn't even the worst part. There were text threads with one person in particular, someone they'd apparently been seeing for months, detailed plans for hotel meetups, receipts forwarded from booking confirmations, messages talking about feelings, about how exciting and passionate this was, about how they wished they could be together all the time, but the timing wasn't right. My partner had a whole second life I knew absolutely nothing about. While I was home cooking dinner or planning our weekend or thinking about our future, they were building an entirely separate relationship with someone else. I sat on the bathroom floor reading through everything. Months of messages, dozens of hotel visits, multiple affair partners, though one seemed to be the primary relationship. I felt physically sick, not just betrayed, but stupid. How had I not seen this? How had I explained away all the signs, all the distance, all the changes? They came home an hour later and found me sitting at the kitchen table with both phones in front of me, their regular phone and the secret one. They stopped dead in the doorway when they saw it. The color drained from their face. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then they started crying, immediate tears, panic, the whole performance. They said they were so sorry, that they'd been under so much stress, that it didn't mean anything. It was just a distraction, a mistake. They loved me. They wanted to fix this. The words came out in this desperate rush, like if they talked fast enough they could undo what I'd discovered. I asked how long. They hesitated, tried to minimize, finally admitted it had been going on for about 6 months. Half a year. Half a year of lying to my face every single day. Half a year of hotel rooms and dating apps, and another person while coming home to me like everything was normal. I didn't yell, I didn't throw things, I just stood up and started packing. They followed me around the apartment begging me to stay, to talk, to work through this. They grabbed my arm at one point, and I looked at them with so much contempt they actually stepped back. I told them not to touch me, told them I was done, told them to stay at a friend's place for the night because I needed to pack in peace. They left, still crying, still trying to explain. I locked the door behind them and finished packing my essentials. But before I left, I did something I'm not entirely proud of, but don't regret either. I logged into their cloud account using the password I knew they used for everything and downloaded every message, every photo, every receipt, all the evidence of their double life, backed up and saved. Then I looked through the messages more carefully and found details about the primary affair partner. Full name, workplace mentioned in conversation, enough information to find them on social media. I looked them up. They were married, had been for 7 years, posted happy couple photos with their spouse regularly. Had no idea they were the side piece in my partner's affair, just like I'd had no idea I was being cheated on. I sent their spouse a message, introduced myself, explained who I was, and attached screenshots of everything. Every message between my partner and theirs, every hotel receipt, every explicit photo. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because if I were in their position, I'd want to know. They deserved the truth the same way I deserved it. This is where patience finally snapped. I filed for divorce the next week. My partner tried everything to stop it. Flowers delivered to my temporary place. Long letters about how they'd changed, how they wanted counseling, how they'd do anything to fix this. They showed up at my work once and I had security escort them out. They texted from new numbers when I blocked the old ones. It was exhausting. Meanwhile, the affair partner's marriage imploded too. Their spouse filed for divorce immediately, apparently. I heard through the mutual connection I'd made with them that it got messy fast. Kids involved, assets to split, the whole nightmare scenario. The affair partner tried to contact me once, actually, sending this bizarre message about how I'd ruined their life by exposing them. I blocked them without responding. They'd ruined their own life by sleeping with someone else's partner while married. I just provided the information. The divorce process took months, but I was methodical. I had evidence of infidelity, which in our state affected the asset split. My lawyer loved me because I came prepared with documentation for everything. My ex tried to paint me as vindictive, tried to claim I'd violated their privacy by accessing their phone. Their lawyer pointed out that finding evidence of infidelity when you have reasonable suspicion isn't illegal, and the phone was in a shared space in our shared home. When it was finally over, when the papers were signed and everything was split, I took the engagement ring they'd given me 3 years ago and sold it. Got a decent amount for it. Used that money to book a solo trip to Italy. 2 weeks, Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast. I ate incredible food, saw incredible art, hiked along coastlines, and didn't think about my ex once. Well, maybe once or twice, but not with sadness or regret. More with this sense of relief that I'd discovered the truth before we'd gotten married, before we'd had kids, before I'd invested even more of my life into someone who was capable of that level of sustained deception. I'm dating someone new now. It's early, we're taking it slow, but they're kind and honest, and importantly, only have one phone. We laughed about that on our 3rd date when I made a joke about it. They understood why I'd have trust issues, didn't get defensive, just reassured me that I'd never have to worry about that with them. I'm not naive enough to think trust comes easy now. It doesn't. I'm more cautious, more aware, quicker to notice inconsistencies, but I'm also more confident in my ability to handle betrayal if it happens again. I survived it once. I came out stronger, clearer about my boundaries, less willing to ignore red flags for the sake of keeping the peace. My ex tried to reach out on the anniversary of when we met. Some nostalgic message about how they still thought about me. I deleted it without reading past the first line. There's nothing they could say that I need to hear. They made their choices, I made mine. We both have to live with the consequences. Trust, once shattered, can't be glued back together with apologies and flowers and promises to change. It's not a broken vase you can repair. It's more like a windshield that's been hit with a rock. Sure, you can keep driving, but the crack is always there, always spreading, always in your line of sight. Eventually, You just need to replace the whole thing. I replaced the whole thing. New life, new relationship, new understanding of what I will and won't accept. And honestly, I'm better for it. The betrayal hurt like hell, but it also freed me from a relationship that was built on lies. I'd rather be alone than live in a beautiful lie, and I'd rather be with someone honest than with someone who needs a second phone to manage their double life. And if you think finding secret phones is brutal, wait until you see what happens when someone rewrites history itself. We dated for 4 years. 4 years of building a life together, or at least what I thought was building a life together. We had routines, inside jokes, plans for the future. We talked about moving in together, about where we'd eventually settle down, about the kind of life we wanted. It felt real and solid and permanent, until it wasn't. The breakup was messy, but not complicated. They cheated. I found out through the absolute worst way possible, stumbling across messages on their laptop while they were in the shower. Not even hidden well, just right there in their messages, explicit conversations with someone else, plans to meet up, things that made it very clear this wasn't a one-time mistake. This had been going on for months. I confronted them that night. They cried, apologized, said it didn't mean anything, that they'd been confused, that they loved me and wanted to fix it. I listened to all of it and then I ended the relationship. Clean break. I packed up the stuff I had at their place, blocked their number, and tried to move on with my life. It hurt like hell, but at least the situation was clear. They cheated. I left. End of story. Except it wasn't the end of the story. A few months later, mutual friends started acting strange around me. Conversations would get awkward when my ex's name came up. People stopped inviting me to group events. I'd see photos on social media of gatherings I wasn't told about, full of people I'd considered friends. At first, I thought maybe it was just the natural fallout of a breakup, people picking sides, the social circle reorganizing itself. It happens. Then a friend I'd known since college pulled me aside after running into me at a coffee shop. She looked uncomfortable, like she was debating whether to say something. Finally, she just asked me straight out why I'd cheated on my ex. I stared at her, completely confused. I hadn't cheated. I'd never cheated. She looked skeptical and said that my ex had told multiple people that I'd been unfaithful, that I'd been controlling and jealous throughout the relationship, and that the breakup had happened because of my behavior. I felt my stomach drop. My ex was lying, systematically lying to our mutual friends, rewriting the entire history of our relationship to make themselves the victim and me the villain. And people were believing them. I tried to ignore it. Told myself that the people who really knew me would know the truth, that lies eventually come out, that I didn't need to defend myself against made-up accusations. I focused on moving forward, on rebuilding my life, on not dwelling on someone who'd already hurt me enough. But that wasn't even the worst part. 6 months after the breakup, my ex posted a long, emotional essay on social media. It was one of those carefully crafted posts that's designed to look vulnerable and raw, but is actually calculated for maximum sympathy. They talked about heartbreak, about being betrayed by someone they'd trusted completely, about the pain of discovering that the person you loved had been lying to you the entire time. They never named me directly, but it was obvious who they were talking about. Mutual friends were tagged. Details from our relationship were mentioned. It was clearly about me. The post got hundreds of likes within hours. Comments poured in supporting my ex, calling them brave for sharing their story, saying they deserve better. People I'd known for years were commenting with heart emojis and messages of support. Some were even making vague references to knowing something was off about me during the relationship. I was being vilified in real time by people who'd once been my friends, based on a completely fabricated version of events. I sat there reading through the comments, feeling a mix of rage and helplessness. My ex had not only cheated on me, but was now successfully convincing everyone that I was the one who destroyed the relationship. They were getting sympathy, support, and validation for being the victim of something they'd actually done to me. I tried to let it go. I really did. I closed the app, tried to distract myself, told myself that responding would just make things worse. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, about all the friends who believed the lies, about my reputation being shredded based on fiction, about my ex getting to play the victim while I was cast as the villain in a story they'd completely fabricated. Then came the breaking point. I still had all the messages, every conversation, every apology they'd sent after I'd found out about the cheating, every promise to do better, every admission of what they'd done. I'd kept them not because I was planning to use them, but because I hadn't gotten around to deleting them. Now I was very glad I hadn't. I made a burner account. Anonymous, no profile picture, no identifying information. Then I created a Google Drive folder and uploaded everything. Screenshots of the conversations where they'd apologized for cheating, the messages where they'd begged me to give them another chance, the texts where they'd admitted to lying to me for months, timestamps on everything, a clear chronological record of what had actually happened. I organized it carefully, numbered the screenshots, added a simple document at the beginning explaining the context, who I was, why I was sharing this, and that everything in the folder was verifiable and authentic. Then I posted the link as a reply to their emotional essay. Just the link, no commentary, no explanation beyond what was in the folder itself. The post was deleted within an hour. My ex took down the entire essay, all the comments, everything. But the damage was done. People had clicked the link, people had seen the messages. The truth was out there now, and you can't unsee evidence like that. My ex's friends started turning on them. People who'd been commenting with support hours earlier were now messaging me privately to apologize, saying they hadn't known the full story, that they felt manipulated. Some people quietly unfollowed my ex without saying anything. Others confronted them directly about the lies. My reputation was cleared almost overnight. The friends who'd been distant started reaching out again, apologizing for believing the lies, asking if we could reconnect. Some of them I forgave, others I didn't. If someone was willing to believe I was a cheater and a manipulator without even asking for my side of the story, that told me something about the friendship that I couldn't ignore. My ex tried to do damage control, posted a vague apology about misunderstanding and different perspectives, but never actually admitted to lying. It didn't matter. Everyone had seen the receipts. The narrative had shifted completely. I didn't gloat. I didn't make follow-up posts or send triumphant messages or rub it in anyone's face. I just moved on, deleted the burner account, went back to living my life. The truth didn't need embellishment or explanation beyond what I'd already provided. The messages spoke for themselves. Looking back, I wish I'd released them sooner. Wish I hadn't spent months letting lies circulate, losing friends, watching my ex play victim while I stayed silent. But I also understand why I hesitated. There's something that feels petty about airing private messages publicly, about engaging in drama, about defending yourself against accusations you know are false. You want to believe that truth wins out naturally, that people who know you will trust you, that lies collapse under their own weight. But sometimes lies don't collapse. Sometimes they build momentum. Sometimes they become the accepted version of events simply because they were told first, told louder, told more convincingly. And sometimes the only way to stop that is to present evidence that's impossible to argue with. I don't regret releasing those messages. They were my truth, my defense against a coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation. My ex made a choice to lie publicly, to weaponize our mutual friends against me, to craft a false narrative where they were innocent and I was guilty. I made a choice to correct the record with facts. Some people still think I was wrong to share private conversations, that I should have taken the high road, stayed silent, let karma handle it. But karma doesn't clear your name when someone's actively destroying it. Sometimes you have to defend yourself. Sometimes the high road just means letting people walk all over you while you smile and pretend it doesn't hurt. The truth doesn't need embellishment. It just needs to be told. Being lied about is terrible, but discovering you were never the priority in the first place? That's a different kind of devastation. I moved 800 miles for my partner's job. That's the kind of thing you do when you're in love, when you believe in the relationship, when someone looks you in the eye and promises you're building a life together. I left behind a career I'd spent years developing, friends I'd known since college, an apartment I loved in a city I knew inside and out. I packed everything I owned into a moving truck and drove to a place where I knew no one except the person I was doing this for. My partner had gotten this incredible job opportunity, the kind you don't turn down. We'd talked about it for weeks. They were excited but worried about leaving me behind. I told them I'd come with them. We'd make it work. We'd been together for 2 years, living together for one, and this felt like the next natural step. Moving together, starting fresh somewhere new, building something bigger than what we had. They promised we'd build a life together. Said it repeatedly, actually. Told me how much it meant that I was willing to make this sacrifice, how they couldn't imagine doing it without me, how we'd be a team in this new city. I believed every word. The first few months were rough, but I expected that. Finding a job in a new city in my field was harder than I'd anticipated. I sent out dozens of applications, did phone interviews, got rejections or silence. Meanwhile, my partner was thriving at their new job, making friends with coworkers, busy all the time. I was home alone most days, scrolling job boards, trying to build a routine in a place that didn't feel like home yet. I was lonely, really lonely, the kind of lonely where you realize how much of your identity was tied to your location, your community, the people you saw regularly. I tried making friends, joined a gym, went to meetup groups, but everything felt forced and exhausting. I missed my old life more than I wanted to admit. 6 months in, things between us started feeling different. My partner was distant, distracted. When we were together, they seemed somewhere else mentally. I chalked it up to work stress, to the adjustment period, to me being needy because I was isolated. I tried not to complain, tried to be supportive, tried to give them space while also desperately wanting more of their attention. Then I found the email. I wasn't snooping, not really. My partner's laptop was open on the kitchen table, they were in the shower, and an email notification popped up on the screen. From someone whose name I didn't recognize. The preview showed enough of the message that I stopped what I was doing and actually read it. It was a response to something my partner had sent. Something about still having feelings, about waiting, about hoping things would work out between them eventually. I felt my heart rate spike. I clicked into the email thread before I could talk myself out of it. Months of emails, starting from before we'd even moved. My partner had been in love with someone else the whole time. Someone from their past who'd been uncertain about commitment, who'd been dating other people, who'd kept my partner in this state of hopeful waiting. And I was the backup plan. The safe option they'd brought along to this new city, just in case their first choice didn't work out. The emails were detailed, my partner pouring out their feelings, talking about how much they missed this person, how they wished things could be different. The other person being non-committal but keeping the door open, saying maybe someday, maybe when the timing was right. And my partner just accepting it, waiting, hoping, while I was sitting in our shared apartment thinking we were building a future together. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I confronted them that night, showed them the laptop, asked them to explain. They didn't even try to deny it at first, just got this resigned look on their face, like they'd been caught doing something they knew was wrong, but had justified to themselves somehow. They admitted everything. They'd been in love with this other person for years. When the job opportunity came up, they'd seen it as a chance for a fresh start, but they'd also kept that door open with their ex, just in case. When I'd offered to move with them, they'd said yes because they didn't want to be alone if things didn't work out with the person they actually wanted. I asked if they'd ever actually loved me, if any of it had been real. They said yes, they did love me, but not the way they loved the other person. I was the safe choice, the reliable one, the person who showed up and committed while they waited for someone who might never choose them. I'd uprooted my entire existence for someone who saw me as a fallback option. I didn't cry right away. I was too angry, too shocked. I asked them why they'd let me move, why they'd let me give up everything, why they'd strung me along when they knew I wasn't their first choice. They didn't have a good answer, just kept saying they were sorry, that they'd thought maybe their feelings would change, that they'd hoped being in a new place would help them move on from the other person. But they hadn't moved on. They'd just brought me along as insurance. I gave them 30 days notice that night, told them I was moving out, moving back home, that we were done. They tried to convince me to stay, said they'd end things with the other person, that they wanted to make our relationship work. I asked why they'd want to make it work now when they'd spent months emotionally cheating and treating me like a consolation prize. They didn't have an answer for that either. I called friends back home, explained the situation, crashed on a couple different couches while I figured out my next steps, packed up my stuff, shipped what I couldn't fit in my car, and drove 800 miles back to where I'd started 6 months earlier. Except I wasn't starting from the same place. I'd lost 6 months of career momentum. I'd lost the apartment I'd loved. I'd lost the version of myself that had trusted someone enough to uproot everything. Rebuilding from zero was brutal. I stayed with friends for a few months while I job hunted, saved money, tried to piece together what my life was supposed to look like now. I felt humiliated. I felt stupid for not seeing the signs, for believing promises that were apparently conditional, for making myself so vulnerable to someone who hadn't valued what I'd sacrificed. But slowly, things started coming together. I found a job, not in my old city, but in a new one I'd always been curious about. This time, it was my choice, my decision, my opportunity. I found an apartment I could afford, made new friends through work, started building a life that was mine, not ours, not dependent on someone else's career or promises. A year later, I'm thriving. The new job turned into a promotion. The new city feels like home in a way the last one never did. And I met someone new, someone who chose me first, not as a backup or a safety net, but as their actual partner. Someone who didn't need to keep doors open with exes or hedge their bets. Someone who showed up fully, the way I'd shown up for my ex and got nothing in return. My ex, I heard through mutual acquaintances that they're still single, still hung up on that same person who never committed, still waiting for someone who'll never choose them the way they refuse to choose me. And honestly, there's a certain poetic justice in that. They sacrificed a real relationship for a fantasy, and now they have neither. Imagine being this confidently wrong about what you had. I don't hate them anymore. I'm too far removed from it, too happy with where I ended up. But I do think about how differently things could have gone if they'd just been honest from the start, if they'd said they weren't over their ex, if they'd admitted they were bringing me along as a backup plan. I could have made an informed choice. I could have stayed in my city, kept my job, protected myself. Instead, they made that choice for me by lying about their intentions. And that's the part that still stings sometimes. Not the breakup itself, but the deception. The way they let me believe I was chosen when I was really just convenient. Moving 800 miles taught me something valuable, though. It taught me that I'm capable of rebuilding from nothing, that I can survive having my life turned upside down and come out stronger on the other side, that I don't need someone else's validation or promises to build a life worth living. And it taught me to never again sacrifice my own stability for someone who sees me as optional. The next time I make a major life change for a relationship, it'll be because we're both all in, both choosing each other first, both willing to bet on us instead of keeping escape routes open. Karma has impeccable timing. My ex lost someone who would have moved mountains for them. I lost someone who saw me as a backup plan. We both got exactly what we deserved. At least I found out before the wedding. This next person wasn't so lucky. I spent a year planning our wedding. A full year of my life dedicated to creating what I thought would be the perfect day to start our life together. I researched venues for months before finding the perfect one. A restored barn with string lights and gardens that looked like something out of a magazine. I went to dozens of dress fittings, tried on what felt like 100 options before finding the one that made me feel beautiful. I tasted food from 6 different caterers, designed invitations, created seating charts, coordinated with florists and photographers and DJs. $30,000. That's how much of my own savings I poured into this wedding. My fiancé contributed some, but I'd been saving for years and I wanted everything to be perfect, so I covered most of it. I didn't mind. I was excited. This was supposed to be the beginning of our forever. My fiancé's family was incredibly supportive through the whole process. His mom helped me pick out centerpieces. His sister came to dress fittings and cried when I found the one. His dad joked about the open bar and how proud he was to be gaining a daughter. They were warm, welcoming, involved in all the planning. I felt lucky to be marrying into a family that seemed to genuinely care about me. 2 weeks before the wedding, my bridesmaids threw me a bachelorette party. Nothing wild, just dinner and drinks at a nice restaurant, some dancing, celebrating with the women I was closest to. My fiancé's sister was there, had become a good friend over the past few years. She was drinking more than usual, getting progressively louder and more emotional as the night went on. We were in the bathroom together, touching up makeup, and she suddenly grabbed my arm and looked at me with these glassy, drunk eyes. She said, "I can't believe you're still going through with this." I laughed it off at first, thought she was making a joke about cold feet or marriage in general. But she didn't laugh. She just stared at me with this expression that was part guilt, part pity, part something I couldn't quite identify. I asked her what she meant. She started crying. Through the tears and the slurred words, the truth came spilling out. My fiancé had been cheating on me for 8 months. Not a one-time thing, not a brief affair, 8 months of sustained, deliberate infidelity, and the whole family knew. I felt the room tilt. I gripped the bathroom counter to steady myself. I asked her to repeat what she'd just said, hoping I'd misheard, that the music from the restaurant was too loud, that I was misunderstanding. She repeated it. My fiancé had been cheating. The whole family knew. They'd decided not to tell me. Why? Because the wedding was already planned. Because they didn't want to cause drama. Because it was easier to let me keep planning, keep spending money, keep living in blissful ignorance than to deal with the mess of telling me the truth. They'd had family discussions about it, apparently, debates about whether to tell me, and they'd collectively decided that staying quiet was the better option. His sister was sobbing now, saying she was sorry, that she'd wanted to tell me, but the family had made her promise not to, that she couldn't keep it in anymore, that I deserved to know before I married him. I stood there in that bathroom, my bachelorette party happening outside the door, 2 weeks away from a wedding I'd spent a year planning, and felt my entire world collapse. I left the party immediately, told my friends I wasn't feeling well, got an Uber home, and spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark trying to process what I'd just learned. My fiancé was out at his bachelor party. I didn't call him. I needed time to think, to decide what to do, to figure out how to handle this information that had just detonated my life. The next morning, I confronted him, told him what his sister had said. He tried to deny it at first, then broke down when he realized I wasn't buying the lies. He admitted everything. The affair had started 8 months ago. It was someone from his work. He said he'd been planning to end it before the wedding, that he loved me, that it was a mistake, that he wanted to marry me and spend his life with me. I asked about his family. He looked away, admitted they knew, admitted they'd told him to end the affair and go through with the wedding, admitted they'd all agreed that telling me would just cause problems and that it was better if I never found out. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I cancelled everything that day, called the venue, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, everyone. Most of the deposits were non-refundable. I lost thousands of dollars in the cancellations, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to marry someone who'd been cheating on me for 8 months while I planned our wedding. I wasn't going to join a family that had collectively decided lying to me was more convenient than telling me the truth. My fiancé begged, full-on sobbing, on his knees, promising he'd change, that he'd go to therapy, that he'd do anything to make it right. His parents called, trying to smooth things over, saying everyone makes mistakes, that cold feet manifest in different ways, that we could work through this. His mom actually said that cancelling the wedding 2 weeks out would be embarrassing for everyone, and maybe we should just go through with it and deal with our issues afterward. The audacity was almost impressive. Almost. I didn't yell, didn't scream, I just gathered every screenshot, every piece of evidence of the affair that I could find on my fiancé's phone and laptop while he was at work. Then I forwarded it all to his entire family. Parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, everyone. I wanted them to see exactly what they'd helped hide from me. Wanted them to sit with the knowledge that they'd prioritized their own comfort over my right to know the truth about the person I was about to marry. Then I posted a single message on social media. Simple, direct, no details. Wedding cancelled, ask them why. I tagged my fiancé, tagged his family, and then blocked every single one of them. Blocked phone numbers, blocked social media, cut off every avenue of contact. The fallout was apparently spectacular. I heard through mutual friends that his family imploded. Siblings fighting with parents about the decision to hide it. Extended family horrified that they'd let it get this far. My fiancé trying to do damage control while his affair partner got dragged into the mess. I didn't watch it unfold. I was done. I'd said what I needed to say, and I moved on. 3 months later, something unexpected happened. I started getting refund checks in the mail. Small ones at first. The photographer sent back half the deposit with a note saying she felt terrible about what happened. The florist refunded a portion. The venue, which had kept the entire deposit according to their contract, sent back $2,000 with a handwritten letter from the owner saying she had daughters and couldn't imagine them going through what I had. By the time all the checks came in, I'd recovered about half of what I'd lost in the cancellation. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was people who didn't know me deciding that compassion mattered more than contract terms. It restored a little bit of my faith in humanity after having it shattered by people who were supposed to love me. I took that money and bought a motorcycle, something I'd always wanted to do but never had. Took a safety course, got my license, and planned a solo cross-country trip. Spent 3 weeks riding from coast to coast, camping under stars, eating at diners, meeting strangers who became brief friends, thinking about my life and what I wanted it to look like going forward. Best money I ever spent, better than any wedding could have been. That trip taught me more about myself than a year of wedding planning ever did. I learned I was stronger than I thought, braver than I'd given myself credit for, capable of starting over even when everything felt ruined. I dodged a lifetime of betrayal. If his family could hide something that significant before we were even married, what would they have hidden afterward? What other lies would I have been expected to live with for the sake of keeping the peace? How many times would I have been told that my feelings were less important than family harmony? I'm grateful to his sister for getting drunk and telling the truth, even though it destroyed everything I'd been planning. Better to know 2 weeks before the wedding than 2 years into a marriage. Better to lose $30,000 than to lose decades of my life to someone who didn't respect me enough to be faithful. My fiancé tried to reach out a few times through mutual friends. I never responded. There was nothing he could say that would change what happened. Nothing his family could say that would excuse what they did. They made their choices. I made mine. And I chose myself. Workplace betrayals hit differently, especially when your own team sabotages you from the inside. I was assigned to manage a major product launch for our company. High visibility project, tight deadlines, significant budget. The kind of thing that could make or break a career. I was excited, nervous, but excited. This was my chance to prove I could handle leadership at a bigger scale. My team was assigned to me, 5 people from different departments who'd be working under my direction for the next 3 months. We had our kickoff meeting. I outlined the timeline, the deliverables, the milestones we needed to hit. Everyone nodded along, said they understood, seemed engaged. I sent a follow-up email with everything in writing, asked people to confirm they'd received it and understood their responsibilities. Most people responded. A couple didn't, but I figured they were just busy. The first milestone deadline came and went. Nothing delivered. I sent emails asking for updates. Radio silence from most of the team. I scheduled check-in meetings. 2 people showed up. The others had conflicting priorities, they said, or they'd forgotten, or they hadn't seen the calendar invite. I rescheduled. Same thing happened. I started getting worried. We were falling behind and I couldn't get anyone to engage. I escalated to my boss, explained that I was struggling to get the team to meet deadlines. He told me that managing people was part of the job, that I needed to figure out how to motivate my team, that excuses wouldn't fly when launch day came. So I tried everything. Different communication styles, one-on-one meetings, group meetings, detailed project plans, simplified project plans, incentives. Nothing worked. The team continued to miss deadlines, ignore emails, skip meetings. When they did show up or respond, the work was incomplete or wrong, like they'd barely looked at the requirements. I documented everything. Every email sent and ignored. Every meeting scheduled and the attendance record. Every deliverable that came in late or incomplete. I'm meticulous by nature, and something about the situation felt off, so I kept detailed records of every interaction. Launch day arrived, and it was a complete disaster. The product wasn't ready, features were broken, documentation was missing. We had to delay the launch, which meant lost revenue, angry stakeholders, and a massive credibility hit for the company. I knew I was going to take the blame, but I didn't realize how bad it would be. The post-mortem meeting was brutal. My boss called it with the entire leadership team present, plus my team members. He ripped into me in front of everyone, questioned my leadership skills, my communication ability, my project management competence, asked how I could have let things get so far off track, demanded to know why I hadn't raised red flags earlier, why I hadn't managed my team better. I tried to explain, tried to point out that I'd been raising flags, that the team hadn't been responsive, that I'd documented ongoing issues. My boss cut me off, said I was making excuses, that a good leader takes responsibility instead of blaming their team. My team sat there silently, didn't contradict him, didn't back me up, didn't mention their own failures to deliver. Just let me take the full weight of the blame for a failure they'd caused. I was written up formally, put on a performance improvement plan, told that if I didn't show significant improvement in the next quarter, my job would be in jeopardy. I walked out of that meeting humiliated, angry, and absolutely certain that something more was going on than just a team that didn't gel. That night, I went through all my documentation, every email, every Slack message, every meeting note, and that's when I started seeing the pattern more clearly. Messages I'd sent that had been read but deliberately ignored. Timestamps showing that people had been online and active but chose not to respond to my requests. Meeting cancellations that always came from the same people at the last minute. And here's where it gets absurd. I started looking at the team's internal Slack channels, the ones I had access to as the project manager. I found a private channel I hadn't noticed before, one that included my team members but not me. The channel name was something innocuous, looked like it could be about anything, but when I clicked into it and started reading, I realized it was entirely about the project, about me. They'd been coordinating the sabotage, explicitly, messages talking about ignoring my emails to make me look disorganized, strategies for missing meetings without it seeming too obvious. Conversations about doing the bare minimum or delivering work that was intentionally subpar, and worst of all, messages mocking me, laughing about how stressed I was getting, joking about how this project was going to tank my career. One message said, "If we just keep playing dumb, she'll take all the heat and we'll be fine." Another said, "Leadership already thinks she's in over her head. This will just confirm it." They'd planned this, deliberately set me up to fail because they didn't want to work under my management, or because they thought it would be funny, or for reasons I still don't fully understand. I took screenshots of everything. Then I went back through my emails and compiled every instance of me trying to communicate, trying to get responses, trying to move the project forward. I pulled meeting notes showing who attended and who didn't. I gathered the deliverables that had come in wrong or late, with timestamps and my feedback. I built a case. Then I requested a formal review with HR and senior leadership. Not my direct boss, the people above him. I said I had evidence that the project failure wasn't due to my management, but due to team members actively sabotaging the work, and I wanted to present it formally. They scheduled the meeting. My boss was required to attend, along with HR, 2 VPs, and the team members involved. I brought a 40-slide deck. I'd spent 2 weeks building it, making sure every claim was backed up with evidence. Every screenshot was time-stamped and contextualized. Every email thread was complete. I walked them through it methodically. Showed emails I'd sent with clear instructions and reasonable deadlines. Showed the read receipts proving people had seen them. Showed the lack of responses, or the responses that came days late with excuses. Showed meeting invitations and the attendance records. Showed the Slack messages where the team had coordinated ignoring me, had laughed about my stress, had explicitly planned to let the project fail so I'd take the blame. The room went completely silent. My boss's face went from confused to pale to red as he realized what he was seeing. The team members started trying to defend themselves, saying the messages were taken out of context, that they were just venting, that they hadn't actually meant to sabotage anything. I pulled up more screenshots, messages that were impossible to misinterpret, explicit discussions of strategy, timestamps proving they'd been active on Slack while simultaneously claiming they hadn't seen my emails, evidence that they'd coordinated their excuses. The HR director stopped the meeting and said they needed to investigate further. Everyone was dismissed except me. They asked if I had copies of everything. I handed them a USB drive with all the evidence organized by date and by team member. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Within a week, 3 of the 5 team members were fired. Not put on performance plans, fired. For insubordination, for deliberately sabotaging company work, for coordinating to undermine a manager. The other 2 were given formal warnings and transferred to different departments. My boss was demoted. Turned out he should have noticed the red flags I'd been raising. Should have investigated when I said the team wasn't responding. Should have looked deeper before publicly humiliating me in that post-mortem meeting. Leadership lost confidence in his judgment. And me? I was taken off the performance improvement plan, given a formal apology from the VP, offered a promotion to a senior management role in a different department, one where I'd be working with people who actually wanted to be there, plus a significant raise and back pay for the time I'd spent under the unfair performance review. I accepted, started in the new role a month later. The product launch was reassigned to someone else, who managed to salvage it with a new team. It eventually launched successfully, which somehow made the whole situation even more vindicating. The project was fine, the plan was solid. The only problem had been a team that had deliberately chosen to destroy it. I still have that deck saved, backed up in 3 places. I pull it up sometimes just to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't a bad manager, that what happened to me was real and deliberate and proven. You never know when you'll need to prove the truth, especially in environments where people are more interested in finding a scapegoat than in understanding what actually went wrong. The experience taught me to trust my instincts and document everything. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if people are willing to let you take the fall for their failures, they're not people you want on your team anyway. Being sabotaged by coworkers is one thing, but being blindsided by the person you trained, that's next level betrayal. My boss called me into her office on a random Tuesday and asked if I'd be willing to mentor a new hire. Said they were bringing someone on to help with the growing workload, that the team was expanding, and she thought I'd be the perfect person to show them the ropes. I was flattered, honestly. It felt like recognition, like they valued my expertise enough to trust me with training someone new. The new hire started the following Monday. They seemed eager, motivated, asked all the right questions. I spent hours walking them through our systems, explaining client relationships, showing them the workflows I'd developed over my 4 years at the company. They shadowed me during calls, sat in on meetings, took meticulous notes on everything I did. I thought I was being a good team player, investing in the company's future, helping build a stronger team. 3 months of this, 3 months of sharing everything I knew, every shortcut I'd figured out, every client preference I'd learned through trial and error. I handed over institutional knowledge like it was nothing, proud to be the person they'd chosen to shape this new employee. The new hire was grateful, constantly thanking me for my patience, telling me how much they were learning. Then my boss called me in again. Different energy this time. She had HR with her, which immediately made my stomach drop. She said there were budget cuts, company-wide restructuring. My position was being eliminated, effective immediately. I had an hour to pack my things. Security would escort me out. I sat there in complete shock. No warning, no performance issues, no indication that my job was in jeopardy. Just suddenly unemployed with an hour to clear out 4 years of my professional life. I asked if there were any other options, any other roles I could transition to. She said no, the decision was final, and I should use my remaining time to gather my belongings. I walked back to my desk in a daze, started packing my personal items into a cardboard box someone from HR had given me. Photos, my coffee mug, the desk plant I'd somehow kept alive for 3 years. And while I'm doing this, while I'm literally packing up my career, the new hire walks over, sits down at my desk. My boss comes over and hands them my client list, the physical printout I'd made notes on, with relationship details and account history. I'd trained my own replacement and never knew. The realization hit me like a truck. This wasn't about budget cuts or restructuring. They'd hired someone cheaper, had me spend 3 months teaching them everything I knew, and then cut me loose the moment I'd outlived my usefulness. The new hire wouldn't meet my eyes. They knew. They'd known the whole time what they were being brought in to do. I wanted to scream, wanted to flip the desk, tell my boss exactly what I thought of her, make a scene that would at least give me the satisfaction of not going quietly. But I was too stunned, too hurt. I just finished packing in silence while my replacement settled into my chair, logged into my computer with credentials IT had apparently already set up, and started reviewing my work. Security walked me out. The same guard who'd smiled at me every morning for 4 years, now escorting me through the lobby like I was a threat. I handed over my badge, my keys, signed some paperwork I barely read, and walked to my car feeling completely numb. It wasn't until I got home that the full scope of the betrayal hit me. I pulled up old emails and started piecing together the timeline. They'd posted the job listing 4 months before the new hire started. Had been planning this for at least half a year. Every conversation with my boss where she'd praised my mentoring, every thank you from the new hire, every moment I'd felt good about helping someone learn, it had all been part of a plan to replace me with someone who'd accept a lower salary. And here's where it gets absurd. I found out later through a former coworker who still talked to me that they'd done this specifically because I'd gotten too expensive. I'd been at the company long enough to have earned raises, to have built up my salary to a point where hiring someone fresh out of college to do the same work saved them $30,000 a year. The mentoring period was just them extracting my expertise before discarding me. I filed for unemployment immediately, updated my LinkedIn profile, rewrote my resume, and started applying for jobs. I was angry, humiliated, and desperately trying not to spiral into panic about how I'd pay rent. But I also had 4 years of solid experience, client relationships I'd built, skills I'd developed. I wasn't starting from zero. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 interviews lined up, companies in my industry, roles similar to what I'd been doing, some even offering more responsibility. I went into those interviews with a chip on my shoulder, determined to prove that letting me go had been a massive mistake. I landed a job with a 40% raise. 40%. Not only was I making significantly more than I'd been making before, but I was working for a company that actually valued employee retention, that had clear promotion paths, that didn't treat people as disposable. My new boss asked during the interview why I'd left my previous role. I was honest, told her I'd been laid off after training my replacement. She looked horrified and said that would never happen at their company. I'm still not sure I fully believed her then, but a year in, I do now. 6 months after I started my new job, I got a message from my former coworker. My replacement had quit. Apparently, they couldn't handle the workload. Turns out, shadowing someone for 3 months doesn't actually prepare you for the reality of managing complex client relationships, handling crisis situations, or making judgment calls that come from years of experience. The new hire had been overwhelmed, stressed, and eventually just stopped showing up. My old boss reached out a week later. Casual message on LinkedIn asking how I was doing, saying she'd heard I'd landed somewhere new, wondering if I'd be open to chatting about potential opportunities back at the old company. She didn't explicitly say she wanted me to come back, but the implication was clear. They'd realized that expertise isn't as easily replaceable as they'd thought. I left her on red, didn't block her, didn't respond, just let the message sit there, seen and ignored. Some bridges deserve to burn, and that was one of them. I have zero interest in returning to a company that treated me as a disposable training resource, that lied to me for months while planning my termination, that valued saving money over valuing people. The whole experience taught me something important. Loyalty to a company is almost always a one-way street. You can give them years of your life, your expertise, your dedication, and the moment it's financially convenient, they'll replace you without a second thought. I'm not bitter about it anymore, I'm past that. But I'm also never again going to assume that doing good work and being a team player guarantees job security. I'm more protective of my knowledge now. I'll train people, I'll help teammates, but I'm not handing over everything I know without understanding the bigger picture. I ask more questions, I pay attention to hiring patterns. I keep my resume updated and my network active, not because I'm planning to leave, but because I learned the hard way that no job is permanent. And honestly, getting fired was the best thing that could have happened to my career. I'm making more money, working in a better environment, with more opportunities for growth than I ever would have had staying where I was. My old company saved $30,000 and lost someone who actually knew how to do the job. I call that a win. My replacement apparently works somewhere else now, probably struggling to rebuild the experience they thought they could download from me in 3 months. My old boss is probably still looking for someone who can actually handle my old workload. And me? I'm thriving. Turns out being undervalued just means you're in the wrong place. Some bridges deserve to burn. That one went up in flames the moment they handed my client list to my replacement while I packed my desk. And I've never looked back. False accusations can end careers, but sometimes the truth has a way of defending itself. A coworker reported me to HR for unwanted advances and hostile behavior. I found out when I was called into a meeting with HR and my manager, both looking uncomfortable, and told that a formal complaint had been filed against me. Sexual harassment, creating a hostile work environment, inappropriate comments, and unwanted physical contact. I sat there completely stunned. The coworker in question was someone I barely interacted with. We worked in adjacent departments, occasionally crossed paths in meetings or the break room, but we weren't friends, weren't close, barely even spoke beyond basic professional courtesies. The idea that I'd been harassing them was so absurd I actually laughed at first, thinking it had to be some kind of misunderstanding. HR wasn't laughing. They told me this was serious, that the complaint included specific incidents with dates and times, that they were required to investigate fully, and that I was being suspended with pay pending the outcome of their review. I tried to defend myself, to explain that none of this made sense, that I'd never done anything inappropriate. They said the investigation would determine the facts and that I needed to leave the premises immediately. I walked out of that building in complete shock, suspended, under investigation for sexual harassment, something I absolutely had not done. I drove home in a daze trying to process what had just happened, trying to remember every interaction I'd ever had with this coworker, searching for anything that could have been misinterpreted. My reputation was demolished overnight. Word spreads fast in offices, and by the next day, people knew. I started getting texts from coworkers, some asking what happened, some just going silent on me. Friends I'd had lunch with regularly suddenly stopped responding to messages. Social media got weird, people unfollowing me or posting vague things about believing victims. I wasn't convicted of anything, wasn't even formally accused beyond the HR complaint, but in the court of workplace opinion, I was already guilty. I felt completely helpless. How do you defend yourself against accusations when you're not allowed to be in the building, when you don't know the specifics of what you're accused of? When HR is conducting an investigation you have no visibility into? I hired a lawyer, spent money I didn't have on legal fees, tried to prepare for the possibility that my career was over before I even had a chance to defend myself. The investigation took 2 weeks, 2 weeks of sitting at home, anxiety spiraling, checking my email constantly for updates, imagining worst-case scenarios. My lawyer advised me to compile any documentation I had of interactions with this coworker, any emails or messages that could prove the relationship was professional and appropriate. I had almost nothing. We just didn't interact that much. Then HR called. They wanted me to come in for a follow-up meeting. My lawyer came with me. We sat in the same conference room, same uncomfortable HR rep, same manager, but the energy was completely different. The HR director was there too, which seemed significant. They told me they'd completed their investigation. They'd reviewed all communications, interviewed witnesses, and, crucially, reviewed security footage from the office. Our building had cameras everywhere, break rooms, hallways, common areas, a security measure that had always felt a bit invasive, but that I was suddenly very grateful for. The footage told a completely different story than the complaint. Every interaction they reviewed showed the opposite of what I'd been accused of. The footage showed my coworker approaching me, not the other way around. Showed them making comments that I visibly reacted to with discomfort. Showed them cornering me in the break room while I tried to maintain distance and eventually walked away. Showed me consistently keeping interactions brief and professional while they pushed for longer conversations. There was one incident in particular that the coworker had described in their complaint as me making inappropriate physical contact. The security footage showed them blocking my path in a hallway, touching my arm while talking, me stepping back and moving around them to leave. They'd reported it as me cornering them and touching them inappropriately. The footage proved it was the exact opposite. But that wasn't even the worst part. During the investigation, HR had also found emails, messages the coworker had sent to friends bragging about their plan. They'd been angling for my position, a promotion that had recently opened up that we were both qualified for. They'd decided that if they could get me fired or discredited, they'd have a better shot at the role. So they'd fabricated the harassment complaint, banking on the fact that in cases like this, companies often side with the accuser to avoid liability. They'd explicitly told someone in an email that they were going to take me down and that a harassment claim would be impossible to defend against. They'd researched HR policies, figured out what kind of complaint would trigger an investigation, and manufactured specific incidents that would sound credible. HR confronted them with the evidence, the security footage showing their behavior versus what they'd claimed, the emails discussing their strategy, the witness statements that contradicted their version of events. According to my lawyer, who got the details later, the co-worker completely crumbled, admitted they'd lied, said they'd felt desperate, that they really needed the promotion, that they didn't think it would go this far. They were terminated immediately, not just fired for the false complaint, but walked out by security, banned from company premises, their access to systems revoked within hours. HR told me I was fully cleared, that the complaint was being expunged from my record, that they were deeply sorry for what I'd been put through. They offered me paid counseling, extra PTO, and assured me that my job was secure and my reputation within the company would be restored. I was reinstated the next day. Went back to my desk, tried to act like everything was normal, but everything had changed. People were apologetic, some genuinely, some awkwardly, but the trust was broken. The people who distanced themselves during the investigation didn't suddenly become friends again. The whispers didn't completely stop. They just shifted from assuming I was guilty to gossiping about the drama. And I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. Someone had tried to destroy my career with a calculated lie, had weaponized a serious issue, something that actual victims deal with, to get a promotion, had been willing to let me lose my job, my reputation, potentially my entire career in the industry, because they wanted something I had. 3 months later, I left the company, got a job offer from a competitor, better role, better pay. My manager tried to convince me to stay, said the company valued me and wanted to make things right. But I was done. Every time I walked into that building, I thought about those 2 weeks of suspension, of feeling helpless and accused, of watching my reputation disintegrate while I couldn't do anything to stop it. My former coworker is apparently unemployable in our industry now. Word spread about what they'd done, and in our field, reputation matters. No one wants to hire someone who's proven they'll fabricate serious accusations to get ahead. They tried reaching out once through a mutual contact, wanting to apologize. I didn't respond. Their apology wouldn't undo the damage, wouldn't give me back those weeks of anxiety and fear, wouldn't restore the friendships that had been casualties of their lie. I learned something crucial from that experience. Documentation matters, but so does systematic protection. Security cameras saved me. If those hadn't existed, it would have been my word against theirs, and in cases like that, companies often err on the side of caution by believing the accuser. I'd have been fired, blacklisted, unable to defend myself with anything more than my own insistence that it wasn't true. Now I keep records of everything. Every interaction that feels slightly off, I document. Every email, every message, I save. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I learned that trust isn't enough. Goodwill isn't enough. You have to protect yourself because there are people out there who will destroy you if it serves their interests, and they'll sleep fine doing it. The irony is that I got the promotion anyway. My new company offered me a senior role that's better than what I would have gotten at the old place. So my former coworker's scheme not only failed, it actually pushed me towards something better. They lost their job, their reputation, and their career trajectory, all for nothing. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving someone enough rope to hang themselves. They built their own downfall, and the security footage was just the tool that revealed it. And finally, when you dare to say no to someone who feels entitled to yes, they'll rewrite you as the villain, but the receipts always tell the real story. A friend I'd known for about 5 years called me one evening, asking if we could meet up for coffee. They sounded stressed, said they needed to talk about something important. I figured they were going through a rough patch, needed someone to vent to, so I said yes. We met the next day at our usual spot, and after some small talk, they got to the point. They needed to borrow $5,000. Emergency situation, they said. Unexpected expense, no other options, just needed a short-term loan, and they'd pay me back within a few months. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't the first time they'd asked to borrow money. Over the years, I'd lent them smaller amounts, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. They always had a reason, always promised to pay me back, and they never did. I'd stopped keeping track at some point because bringing it up always turned into this whole thing where they'd get defensive or emotional, and I'd end up feeling like the bad guy for even mentioning it. But $5,000 was different. That wasn't a small favor. That was significant money, and I knew based on history that I'd never see it again. So I said no. I tried to be gentle about it, said I wasn't in a position to lend that much right now, that I had my own financial obligations. They pressed, asked if I could do part of it, even half. I held firm, said no, I couldn't, and maybe they should look into other options like a personal loan from a bank or asking family. The conversation got tense. They said they thought they could count on me, that real friends help each other in emergencies. I pointed out that I'd helped before and hadn't been paid back, which made me hesitant. That's when things got heated. They accused me of holding the past over their head, said those previous loans were different, that I was choosing money over friendship. I stayed calm, repeated that I couldn't lend them the money, and suggested we talk another time when emotions weren't so high. They left angry. I thought maybe they'd cool off, that we'd talk in a few days and work through it. Instead, the campaign started. Within a week, mutual friends were reaching out asking what had happened, why I'd abandoned our friend in their time of crisis. I was confused at first, didn't understand where this was coming from. Then I started seeing the vague social media posts. Nothing that named me directly, but obvious enough that people who knew us would connect the dots. Posts about fake friends, about people who only stick around when it's convenient, about being let down by someone they'd trusted. People I'd known for years were messaging me, asking if I was okay, if something had happened between us, why I was being so cruel. The narrative was that I'd refused to help during a genuine emergency, that I'd turned my back on someone in desperate need. I was the villain in a story I hadn't even known was being written. I tried to take the high road initially, didn't respond to the posts, didn't defend myself publicly, just told people privately that there was more to the story, but I wasn't going to air it out on social media. I thought the truth would speak for itself, that people who really knew me would trust my judgment. But the narrative kept growing. More posts, more vague references, more friends reaching out with concern or judgment. Then came the breaking point. Someone sent me a screenshot of a group chat I wasn't in. My former friend was telling people that the emergency was medical, that they needed the money for treatment they couldn't afford, and that I'd coldly refused to help, despite knowing how serious it was. None of that was true. The emergency they'd told me about was completely different, and I'd found out through another friend that the money was actually for a vacation they wanted to take. A vacation. They were running a sympathy campaign based on a fabricated medical crisis to make me look heartless. I was done being quiet. I pulled up my message history with this person, screenshots of previous loan requests, and my Venmo transfers showing I'd sent money multiple times, screenshots of conversations where they'd promised to pay me back and then ignored every follow-up I sent, screenshots of the actual conversation where they'd asked for the $5,000, showing they'd told me it was for something completely different than what they were now claiming publicly. Then I did something I probably should have done earlier. I reached out to a few other mutual friends privately and asked if this person had ever borrowed money from them. Turned out I wasn't alone. They'd asked multiple people, always with urgent stories, always promising repayment, never following through. One friend sent me screenshots of nearly identical messages to what I'd received. Same phrasing, same urgent tone, different amounts. I compiled everything into a single post, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. I was tired of being painted as a villain for setting a boundary, tired of defending myself in private while they destroyed my reputation in public. I posted the screenshots with minimal commentary, just said that I'd been accused of abandoning a friend in crisis, and here was the actual history for anyone interested in the full story. The response was immediate. The truth detonated their credibility completely. People who'd been criticizing me were suddenly apologizing, saying they'd only heard one side, that they felt manipulated. Friends who'd been distant started reaching out to reconnect. The narrative flipped entirely. I went from villain to victim in the span of a few hours. My former friends' posts disappeared. Then their entire account disappeared. They deactivated everything, stopped responding to messages, essentially vanished from our social circle. I heard through someone else that they'd moved to a different city shortly after, though I don't know if that was planned or a reaction to the fallout. I don't feel vindicated. Honestly, I just feel tired. Tired from having to defend myself. Tired from losing a friendship that clearly wasn't what I thought it was. Tired from the whole drama. But I also feel free. Free from the guilt I'd been carrying about saying no. Free from the obligation to keep protecting someone who'd been actively trying to destroy my reputation. free from a dynamic that had been one-sided for years. People asked me afterward why I didn't just let it go, why I had to expose everything publicly. And the answer is simple. I tried letting it go. I tried taking the high road. I tried trusting that the truth would speak for itself. But silence in the face of lies doesn't preserve your integrity. It just gives the lies room to grow. Defending yourself isn't cruel. Exposing manipulation isn't vindictive. When someone weaponizes your kindness, uses your past generosity as evidence of future obligation, and then paints you as a villain for finally saying no, you have every right to correct the record. That's not about revenge, that's about survival. I learned something important from this whole mess. Boundaries aren't mean. Saying no doesn't make you a bad person, and people who genuinely care about you will respect your limits instead of punishing you for having them. The ones who try to destroy you for setting boundaries were never really your friends to begin with. My former friend tried to make me the villain for saying no. Instead, they exposed themselves, and that's not something I did to them. That's something they did to themselves by choosing manipulation over honesty, public shaming over private conversation, and fabricated emergencies over real friendship. I don't know where they are now or what they're doing. I hope they've learned something from this. But honestly, that's not my responsibility anymore. I protected myself, cleared my name, and moved forward. And that's enough. If you've made it this far into the chaos, I hope you're feeling a little less alone in your own messy stories. Life has a funny way of exposing the truth, doesn't it? Whether it's through a misplaced screenshot, a funeral confession, or just the slow, undeniable weight of receipts, the truth always finds its way to the surface. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, boundaries aren't cruel, silence isn't always golden, and sometimes the best revenge is just living well and letting karma handle the rest. I'll see you in the next one with even more stories that prove reality is stranger than fiction. Sleep tight and don't let the betrayals bite.